So where are things right now with Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay? That's what I'm kind of kicking around because I'm thinking about trying to push it out on role-playing nights to play it a little bit more aggressively. And I feel like I'm dealing with this dual challenge here of not only potentially the rules, but also the narrative itself and that kind of draw, that feeder in for players. Now I'm going to jump over for a second and analyze this from a Dungeons & Dragons perspective. And if you've been following my RPG podcasts and vlogs, D&D exerts a tremendous influence over me for two reasons. Well, obvious, AD&D was the first role-playing system that I played. I enjoyed a lot of really, really amazing memories, really good times spent enjoying and playing this system. But just being the biggest system on the block, D&D 5.0, it's easy to find players. It's easy to kind of round people up, new players, continuing players. It's not a lot of work to get a group going. It's not a lot of work to join a group, if you're a DM or a player. So that comes naturally. And there's a lot of great things about D&D. But one of the things in my mind that I see keeps D&D going is not only, of course, the massive player base over the years of it actively being supported. Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay never really had that, and certainly doesn't have that right now. But the success of D&D is this constant feed of new players that consume digital, right? MMOs, online games, various digital portals that, for whatever reason, through discovery or they're looking for something else, they make that transition over to analog and D&D. They might have some weird ideas on how to play D&D. A great example would be like a cleric is just a heal bot, because they're used to online. Whoever's the healer in the party is just going to heal stats and heal bot the entire time. Cleric does a lot more in D&D for that. So there is a little bit of learning the culture, but there's this constant feed in. Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay was never that big. Now, we could say it's a cult following and pushing into that. But what I did see, and I was able to draw on, to fill my table and to have players, never legions and legions, but enough that we could pull a game together, Warhammer Fantasy players, the actual Warhammer Fantasy tabletop, being out in the spotlight, being able to go and grab some Warhammer Fantasy tabletop players and pull them into roleplay. I saw this with Dark Heresy for a long time. Essentially, all my Dark Heresy groups are dormant. I haven't played it in a couple of years. There's a good chance that how things break down. There's a lot of historical wargamers, DBA, Ancients, World War I, World War II. That's what they play, and there's a slight crossover to other systems like 40K and Battletech. But then what I noticed for 40K, Warhammer 40,000, at least half of Warhammer 40,000 players are also role-playing players, usually D&D, maybe some obscure systems out there, but they play it or they played it at some point. So it was super easy to be like, who are the 40K players in the group or the 40K players that I regularly play with? Let's pull in some RPG, let's pull in some Dark Heresy. I used to be able to replicate that with Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. I still have a Goblin army on there. I haven't Sigmarized it yet. And I would play every now and then, every couple of months, I'd play Warhammer Fantasy just to keep that connection going and also to play my army. And I enjoyed Warhammer Fantasy Tabletop, but it's the eternal gaming problem, right? Annoying things like responsibilities and real life and school, keeping me busy from playing games all the time. And the time that I do have to play, there's so many amazing systems to enjoy. And my primary systems of Wings of Glory, X-Wing miniatures, Battletech, Chain of Command, 40K, Warhammer Fantasy was a secondary system on there. But I had that connection. When Games Workshop blew up the old world and got rid of it, and that's it, it's done. Really, Warhammer Fantasy's dead, died, and done. I'm here in New York. easily 3 or 4 or 5 big gaming groups, both sponsored by clubs and its stores. There's a couple of meetup and other events. I mean, it's a major city. It's a lot of active stuff on there. There are no Warhammer Fantasy players. There aren't. Now, in the comments, if by some chance you're here in New York, post that, prove me wrong. All the fantasy players that I know, a percentage of them sold their armies once it became obvious that this was it, the final money grab from Games Workshop. Those that didn't made the transition over to Age of Sigmar, either converting their armies or using their army as a stopgap and then selling it off and going full Age of Sigmar. And that's a great transition in there. But that whole pool dried up. Who even knows about the old world anymore? Who even understands about the seduction of chaos? The fact that the old world, magic is rare, it's deadly. Not everyone is carrying a magic +1 sword. It's a very, very unique, dark, and dangerous place from there. So the challenge here is, before we even get to the rule system, pulling in players, because most of the players that break down, they're Dungeons and Dragons players. They're used to level 1 being a hero. They're used to power leveling up fast. They're used to dripping magic items and gear. They're used to fighting all sorts of weird monsters. You get to Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, and you're just an average person on there. And you've been thrust into chaos. You've been thrust into this gaming world. Combat's deadly. Chaos is everywhere. You get hit by a sword, you're probably dead, or you're in a lot of trouble on there. So you really want to try to avoid combat or stay at a distance. And something like as potent as a wolf or a dire wolf is a big challenge. Beastmen, the equivalent to that, a lot of new players think are just, kind of trash mob, wastoid orcs. Beastmen are terrifying. Undead, ghouls and things like that, they're terrifying. They absolutely are. And I had the conversion. We ran a long time ago an adventure conversion of a dragon, in one of the forests there, an Elvish dragon. Fighting that was like, there's no way we were going to win. I mean, it's just crazy, crazy, crazy. So I find that when I do set up a role-playing session and I try to bring in some D&D players, it's too much of a culture shock on there. It's just too radical. And then we get into the rule system on here. So if you're a Warhammer Fantasy player, role player, you're with me up to this point, because I haven't invoked 3rd edition yet. And it is my favorite edition, and I think it is the best edition since Games Workshop is never bringing anything out. I mean, there's the new reprint to 4th. I saw it online a little bit, then it's gone. I don't know anybody that's playing it. A lot of people are playing kind of the classic version on there, if at all. I think Games Workshop had it in print because Fantasy Flight lost the license, and they were hoping for a limited print run, a specialized print run, and that's it. It's done and done. It's never coming back. I think we'd get an Age of Sigmar type of print before we get anything else role-playing. But for me, what was really, really unique about the 3rd edition, and it's very polarizing. I get it. I understand it. I don't have as much baggage because I didn't come in as other editions. But the use of the storytelling dice. Fantasy Flight, it's kind of interesting where Fantasy Flight with their X-Wing miniatures, you have players that are like, X-Wing is the greatest game ever. It's so dynamic. It plays so well. Full disclosure, I love X-Wing. I play it competitively. But like Fantasy Flight didn't think of that idea. They borrowed that from Wings of Glory. And you also see people saying, Star Wars with the Destiny dice and the Oracle systems and all this and the storytelling dice, this is the first game where it's like, no, actually Fantasy Flight borrowed that from Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, their first incarnation. There was a lot of experimental things with that. The peril track, the party track, party abilities, the chance of not only success or failure dice, but opening up boons and banes and building your dice pool and how much do you want to risk? Do you want to go defensive? Do you want to go aggressive? Yeah, it kind of played like a board game, but how I enjoyed it from the perspective of a game master. I almost said dungeon master. I guess I could be a dungeon master too. But from a game master, I found it I always looked forward to running a Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay game because I didn't know how things were going to turn out. I've got the story. Not only do I not know what the players are going to do, we don't know what the dice are going to do. We don't know how many chaos symbols are going to come up. We don't know how many Sigmar symbols are going to come up on there. We don't know what's going to go down. So it's entertaining from my perspective and keeps me wanting to run adventures because not only is there the unique discovery of what the players are going to do and the lethality of the game and other things, but just how are those storytelling dice going to play out? And I understand it gets away from the D100 mechanics and looking up on a million charts to see what happens and this and that. Those charts have kind of been replaced by all the cards in the game, and the dice add a unique weight. So for that reason, I want to be pulled in. I want to play it, and I don't want to play it from Star Wars on there. So my new attack plan, because ultimately a lot of criticism that was fired off on this game is somewhat true. Fantasy Flight took a role-playing game at the time, a very, very good, dedicated, hardcore role-playing system, and turned it into a board game and marketed it as a role-playing game, but honestly it was a board game with how it plays. Well, that might be the very savior of it to try and get some new players in. I'm going to experiment with, I'm not even going to say it's a role-playing game. We're going to run it as a board game. Instead of creating a character and rolling up a character, you're going to generate your character and stock your character. Instead of going on a quest, we're going to run the mission on there and kind of play it out from that perspective. I think that is how I will draw in some new players to explore this wonderful, wonderful system that's on there. But the only thing I can see for the future of it, the old world's never coming back. The connection to Warhammer Fantasy Tabletop is long gone. There's not going to be any more additions. The only thing I can see is existing in a sea of role-playing games and almost being a subculture on there. All my friends that play Vampire and Werewolf are like, well, Fritz, this is how we've been existing forever. So it's just how it is on there. Be interesting to see how it plays out.